Hi, everybody. With our Food Healed Me series, we share the inspirational stories of people who have used the power of food to heal themselves from chronic illness and disease and reclaim their health and hope. For today's Food Healed Me story, I have the pleasure of speaking to Dr. Saray Stancic, who will share her own personal story of using the healing power of food to help her live with multiple sclerosis. Dr. Stancic is a triple board certified in internal medicine, infectious disease, and lifestyle medicine. For the past 20 years, she has worked to promote the power of preventative and lifestyle medicine on a global scale and bring needed change to how we train physicians. She's the producer and co-creator of the documentary film Code Blue and author of the book What's Missing from Medicine: 6 Lifestyle Changes to Overcome Chronic Illness. Dr. Stancic, thank you so much for taking part in the Food Healed Me series. So how are you going today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much, Damien, for the invitation. I'm so happy to be part of it.
Awesome. Well, let's get started and let's talk about what happened with regard to your own personal story with discovering that you had multiple sclerosis. So people can get a little background and
Sure.
what started you on your amazing journey.
Yeah. So I guess I have to take you back to October 11th, 1995. On that day, I was a third-year medical resident, and I was on call at a medical center. And it was a really, really busy night, one of those nights where your pager didn't stop ringing. I was literally running from one side of the hospital to the other, and really, truly exhausted. I found a window around, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning to make it back to the on-call room to take a brief nap. The minute I got there, Damien, I passed out. I was so tired. Within half an hour, I was paged again to address another urgent matter. But when I tried to get up out of that sleeping position, an extraordinary thing happened. I couldn't feel my legs. It was just like that. Um, I panicked. Next thing I knew, I was in the emergency room undergoing an MRI of my brain and spinal cord, and those studies confirmed a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis with multiple lesions in both my brain and spinal cord. And so everything changed for me in that split second. I was no longer that young, healthy physician. I was now a chronic illness patient with multiple sclerosis.
Awesome. So what went through your mind when you received this diagnosis? Because you're still a pretty
Yeah.
young person when you received it.
Yeah, I had just turned 28 years old, and I was living the dream. I always wanted to become a physician, and I was about to complete my training and embark on this career. And all of a sudden, I'm told you have this disease. And I had so much disease at the time, so many lesions in my brain and spinal cord that the doctors were quite alarmed, and they said to me, "You're likely going to be within 10 years in a wheelchair." And you need to rethink what you're going to do. And so, obviously, hearing this when you're 28 years old, it's like the floor is being pulled out from under you, and there's just deep depression and sadness and this sense of loss and sense you lose hope. Um, and so, my doctors at the time told me the good news is that there's a new drug that was just approved. The very first drug was approved for to slow the progression of MS. MS is not a curable disease, but the idea with these disease modifying therapies is to slow the progression. So they said to me, well, maybe you won't, instead of 10 years, the wheelchair, we can maybe extend that to 15 years. So that was the good news with this drug. And at this point, I'm trusting in them, um, just just being so afraid of what my future would be like. So I started the medication, and the side effect profile was horrific. It was a drug that I would have to inject every day for the rest of my life. It was a drug that I was told the best approach to it was to inject it right before I went to bed so that I could sleep through most of the side effects. So I would inject the drug at 10 o'clock at night, but like clockwork, I would wake up at 2 a.m., shaking chills, fever, nausea, just this sense of illness every night. So, and then I couldn't go back to sleep. So long story short, the response to this, in order to keep me compliant with the medication, was to treat the side effects of that drug with other drugs. So when I couldn't sleep, I was given Ambien. When I couldn't wake up, I was given Provigil and amphetamine-like drugs. So at the end of the day, I snowballed into this young woman within 5 years, dependent on a dozen drugs. And despite all of these medications that I was taking, the disease continued to progress. And I found myself within a few years dependent on a cane, crutches, or a walker. Really, really poor quality of life. Fatigue that was just hard to describe, just unable to get out of bed, fatigue. But somehow throughout all of this, I fought through it, was able to complete my training, went on to do a fellowship in infectious diseases, and was married and tried to live my life. But I can tell you that it was all an uphill battle, very, very difficult. And then what I call my aha moment came in 2003. So this is about 8 years into the diagnosis. And as I said, at this point, I'm walking with a cane. I'm working as a chief of infectious diseases at the VA New York. And on one afternoon, by chance, I come across this throwaway medical journal. And on the cover, and it's a journal that I would typically not really read because it wasn't any of any importance, but on the cover, I see the words multiple sclerosis and blueberries. And I think to myself, well, what in the world could blueberries have to do with multiple sclerosis? So of course, piqued my interest, and I turned to the article, and it was a really poorly constructed small study that essentially took a small group of MS patients and fed them a diet rich in blueberries. And the authors went on to report that these patients felt better, which was not a very objective clinical endpoint. And as a scientist and researcher, I was like, wow, I can't believe anyone did such a study, and actually somebody published it. This is ridiculous. I remember thinking to myself, wow, I had lunch with a colleague of mine that afternoon, and I told him about it. He happened to be a neurologist, and he laughed, and so did I. But there was something about that silly blueberry study that sparked something in me. And I started to think for the very first time, as, mind you, a dual board certified attending physician, for the first time, could there be a connection between diet and disease? Now, that's quite extraordinary as a physician that I didn't understand that connection. But how could I, right? Through 4 years of medical school, 4 years of internal medicine training, another 2 years as an infectious disease specialist, none of my mentors, professors, or educators ever connected those two dots. So why would I? But here I was in the midst of battling this disease that was really robbing me of any joy, and like just desperately trying to find a way to crawl out of this this difficult life that I was experiencing. And so that triggered something in me. And so I decided to look into the literature, and I typed in, I went to the search engine, and I just typed in words like multiple sclerosis and diet, and chronic disease and diet. And of course, what I got back was extraordinary mountain of evidence. And one of the first publications that I came across was written by a physician named Roy Swank. And in that article, and this was published in 1952 in the New England Journal of Medicine, so more than 60 years. And in this publication, he writes about the incidence of MS in Norway, which, by the way, has one of the highest rates of MS. And he notes that within that country, the highest occurrence of MS is in the inner farming dairy community, where they're consuming a lot of dairy and animal sources. And he notes that there's a difference on the coast, where they're consuming primarily fish and vegetation. There's the lower incidence. And so he starts to connect these dots that somehow there's a higher incidence with these animal sources of food. And so he goes on to start collecting data from a group of patients where he puts them on a low-fat plant-based diet and follows them over an extended period of time. I think it was 140 plus patients, and he follows them for over 34, almost 50 years in some cases. And he finds at the end of all of this that the majority of these patients who consume this diet, more than 90% of them are still like mobile and have relatively good quality of life. So this data was like, wow, it was like, oh my God, how do I not know this? How is it that my doctors who are MS specialists, the best in the world in New York City, have not talked to me about this? And so I was really, for the first time in a long time, had hope and I believed that there was a way that I could improve my health outcome. And so when I went to my doctors and shared this with them, they were just they couldn't believe that I thought that changing my diet was going to make any meaningful improvement in the course of my illness. And they said to me, you know what, just stop this. You should know better. You're a physician. Remain compliant with your medication and forget all of this. But I knew that something wasn't right, and I needed to at least try. And so in 2003, against everyone's recommendations, I decided that I was going to taper off of all of these medicines, and there were many to taper off. And I was going to wholeheartedly dedicate my attention to optimizing every aspect of my lifestyle. So when I looked at the literature, not just the MS literature, but the literature in, all metabolic diseases and autoimmune diseases, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, all of when you look at the literature, it's clear that a diet that is rich in plant-based foods, fiber, antioxidants, phytonutrients, that they all play a role in reducing inflammation and reducing risk of disease and improving health outcomes. We know, for example, cancer patients who consume a primarily plant-based diet, there's less likelihood that we'll have recurrence. So anyway, I decided in 2003 that I was going to change my diet to consume a whole food plant-based diet. I couldn't even walk at that point without the cane, and so the only sense where I could feel safe was riding a stationary bike. And Damien, I can tell you that when I first started in 2003, I couldn't even get onto a bike without assistance. And I would get on there and I could do 30 seconds at most, a minute, and then exhausted and in pain, my husband would carry me off. But every day I would do this. I would return. And before that, I knew it, those 30 seconds grew into 2 minutes and 5 minutes. And over time, I got stronger and stronger and resistance training. And I went from that young woman who couldn't walk without a cane to ultimately starting to run. And then in 2010, I ran a marathon, which was really one of the highlights of my life, really, to be able to accomplish that. And then also managing stress, really focusing on that. Actually, one of the biggest and most difficult hurdles for me was learning how to sleep properly. I was addicted to either anxiolytics or sleep agents like Ambien, and because that's what they gave me for years. It was just one prescription after another when I couldn't sleep. And so really understanding the physiology of sleep, the importance of the environment, the behaviors that we have around sleep and how they're so important, and how learning how to sleep properly and sleeping on my own was such a gift, and really I think catalyzed my recovery in such a way. But it was all of these aspects that came together, and I just it was extraordinary to me how ill I was, and then how well I was, without having to take any of these medications, and really just using common sense and really applying it to my life. And that's why I'm so passionate about spreading the word and sharing this with whomever is willing to hear it, because there's nothing special about me. I was just someone who was diagnosed with a chronic illness, and was desperate to find a way out of it, and I found it, and so you have this wonderful blessing that came upon you. Want to share it, you want to share it with as many people as possible in hopes that you can serve the community around you.
Awesome. Well, I wouldn't say you're not special because you actually persevered when so many people would have given up, and you kept on applying yourself, like going back to the bike, every single day, and then keeping on like believing that there was a way out of this. So like so many people give up so early in the piece, and they perhaps miss out on the opportunity that could happen if they kind of like persevere. So you're definitely not the average. You're definitely someone who persevered, and that's why we need to share your story, so we can inspire others to believe that there is hope if they're willing to go through the journey. So I wouldn't discount what you've done. Quite a journey.
Well, I think what I'm trying to say is that we can all do it. We just have to
Yeah.
make the decision to put the effort in, and it will bear fruit. And I think regrettably, in the world that we live in today, everyone wants that quick fix, right? That's why we tend to choose these fad diets or whatever is trending at the time, but that's not long lasting, and that's not going to serve you in the end. So it's really about putting in the work each day, um, and it makes all the difference in the world. And I think for me, not only as a patient but as a physician, the next step was not only sharing my story, but how could I translate this clinically to serve my patient population, right? Because one of the biggest concerns that I had was that how is it that we don't train our physicians to incorporate this? Or, the idea of nutrition playing a role in human health is, I know this is hard to believe, but we don't learn anything about nutrition in medical school. We're trained on this idea of pathogenesis. So what we learn is about illness. We don't learn. So human health, right? There's the mirror image, there's illness and wellness, what we call pathogenesis and salutogenesis. Medical school and all of our training is based on pathogenesis. So the study of illness, which of course is important. We need to know illness. We need to understand it. And obviously there are many medications, and the pharmaceutical industry plays an important role in the field of medicine, obviously. But our first and our primary concern should be preventing disease. As physicians, that's really where we should put a tremendous amount of effort. We know, Damien, that 80% of the chronic diseases that we see today in clinical practice are preventable. That's extraordinary, and yet we don't act. We place no emphasis on that. Imagine if we could do that, if we could prevent 80% of the number one cause of death in our country and globally is heart disease. We know how to prevent that, and we don't do that. What do? We prescribe, or we develop yet another drug to manage cholesterol or to manage hypertension. Yet we know how to prevent it. And again, all of those things need to be done because we're always going to have the need for it. But if we could prevent disease, that's really where we should spend so much. We should give more attention to. And so that's really been, in the latter half of my career, what I've been focused on is bringing attention to the connections between diet and disease. There's so much we can do. So not only communicating this to patients and community, but also speaking to as many in the world of academia and medical schools, so that we can change the curricula so that doctors understand that we need to do this. We can't just continue on the path that we're on, where we are spinning our wheels and when I made a film the documentary called Code Blue, and Code Blue is really about shedding light on this lapse in medicine, and how this machine that we call our healthcare system is really it really needs to be revamped and readdressed. And when I made the film, when we started filming, at the time, the cost of healthcare in our country was $2.9 billion per year. And that was about 5 years ago. Today it's 4.1 billion. So, so when I was looking at, we did a screening recently, and I'm looking at the cut, and in the film, we're talking about 2.9 million. Just a few years later, now we're at 4.1. We just continue to, obesity rates continue to climb in our country. Well, when I wrote my book, 9 states in the United States had obesity rates greater than 35%. Today, we have 22 states that have obesity rates greater than 35%. It just, every year, we have worse news. Like, when does it end? When do we wake up? When do we turn things around?
No, definitely. I mean, that's why we need things like Code Blue, and then conversations like this to help people get educated themselves and do a little bit of what you did, take ownership of your health, and make decisions around that using, the right kind of like information. I think my personal opinion is a lot of people just outsource their own empowerment to others, being the medical profession, and without asking the question themselves, like, and actually using common kind of like sense knowledge to kind of like, challenge what the doctors are kind of like prescribing. Like, I've seen my parents where they ended up with a bunch of like pills, and then it was just like a next pill, next pill, but there wasn't any kind of conversation about what they could do to prevent this kind of like occurring. So I think people need to take ownership themselves and understand there is a lack in the medical community, not because of the doctor's fault. It's just the way the system's kind of been designed, and that there are others like yourself available to seek them out, and then to also get the information themselves and not just rely on one opinion, maybe like use multiple opinions to make sure they can make an informed decision on what's the best steps for themselves.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think that it's important to point out that it's not that physicians don't want to be helpful to their patients. It is that this is the way that they're trained. This is all they know. So the problem, really, the root cause of this is really the medical schools and how we're training our physicians. So so that we need to modify that. And I think the good news is that this idea of lifestyle medicine, which is a relatively new discipline, it's been around for about, I think, 25 years, is really spreading all across the world. I know you're in Brazil right now, and there is a Brazilian College of Lifestyle Medicine. There's an Italian College of Lifestyle Medicine. Obviously, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine was the first, but they're spreading all over the world. And physicians are so many physicians are realizing, I don't want to just prescribe medications and I see my patients worsening. I want to do something else. And I remember when I first became aware of this field, I was so excited, because I'm like, wow, there are other doctors that understand this, that are seeing this, that are seeing a need for this. And I remember the first time I went to a conference, I think it was in 2011 or 2012, and there might have been 100 physicians there. The most recent conference, I think, had thousands of physicians. So it's wonderful to see so many joining this movement. And I think the world is changing, and I think the field of medicine is changing for the better. And but I think it's wonderful that what you're doing, sharing this and getting the word out, is so important. That's the power of mechanisms like this, where we can get the word out, and patients can ask questions. You can probably find a lifestyle medicine physician in your part of the world. There, because as I said, this is becoming more and more common, and it's wonderful to see in this short period of time, the awareness has spread, and it's not just the patients that are asking for this, it's physicians wanting to change their approach and really wanting to heal their patients in a way that unfortunately they didn't know of previously, and they're becoming educated now.
Awesome. So let's go back a little bit to your story and like dive in a little bit more. Like as the theme for our talk today is like food healed me, and then obviously you've mentioned before food was a big part of your healing journey. Obviously there was sleep, getting back to exercising, managing your stress were all important elements, but changing your diet was kind of like the catalyst for being able to make some of these other changes as well. So,
Sure.
so let's talk specifically about that. So you went whole food, plant-based. Were there any other kind of like elements to that that perhaps you can share with the audience that could be beneficial?
Well, I mean, I think I didn't change my diet like 100% overnight. It was about you know, substituting. For example, a lot of what I was doing was eat, because as a medical resident and somebody who was always on the run and working long shifts, I was purchasing a lot of my food, and so trying to carve out time to make my own food and learn how to get into the kitchen and cook was something that was really, really important. But I'll give you an example. In the morning, I would eat something like, I would run on my way out to the hospital. I would stop at Dunkin' Donuts and get a muffin. I was healthy. Instead of getting a donut, I was getting a muffin, right? And a cup of coffee with cream and sugar. So unhealthy. So instead, now I was replacing my breakfast was about making some oatmeal in the morning with a bowl of berries. So now I have all of this fiber that I'm consuming. Whenever we know the importance of antioxidants and phytonutrients. So I always tell my patients a colorful plate is a healing plate, right? So knowing and understanding, really understanding, what gives that blueberry that beautiful color is anthocyanin. It's that phytonutrient, and really understanding um, and taking the time to sit with my food and not just rush and eat in the car, which is what I used to, but almost meditate as I'm consuming this food. Like, this food is healing me. This food is serving me in such a way. And I got, and there was a level of excitement about that. Like, how can I make a really colorful meal? So I started to explore and try, things that maybe I hadn't had before. Just going into the produce aisle at Whole Foods and just experiencing new foods that I had never tried before, and recipes, and trying to learn as much as I could about how I could eat a diet that was not only healing but also delicious, um and how my everything changed. Like, I just felt like when I started eating this way, my thought processes were clearer. I had more energy, that fatigue. So fatigue is a really big and important uh, symptom that MS patients deal with. It's something that, again, is really hard to describe, but you wake up in the morning and you just feel like you just can't get out of bed. It drowns you. And when I started to eat in this way, at first a little bit shy to give up some of the things that I really love, like cheese or you know whatever, chicken, things that I was routinely consuming. Noticing how every time I cut one of these foods out of my diet, how the payback was really fulfilling, because I could see that fatigue that I was dealing with was just gone. All of a sudden, I had the energy to get through the day, and even had the energy to do more than what I would typically do. And again, for years, this was almost a decade of my life where I really was struggling to just get through the daily activities of life. And all of a sudden, that fatigue, that veil was lifted. And so there was this incredible uh, desire to just do so much and to just get involved and to see the world, and you know, all of this color came into my life, literally from the plate, and jumped off into my world. And it was just like, it was like, you know, if you've seen the film Wizard of Oz, you know, when Dorothy goes from the black and white to the color,
Yeah.
that's what it felt like. And so early on, and remember, this is before really this whole like, I don't know, this whole world became very like before Forks Over Knives or all of these films and everyone talking about this. It wasn't mainstream. I was sort of learning on my own. And as I continued to do this, more and more, adding more and more of these whole food, plant-based foods into my life, and really not only just adding them in because I understood, but understanding what it was, like fiber, the role that fiber plays, the difference between soluble fiber and insoluble fiber, and what each component, how it was reacting in my body, what it was doing to the microbiome, right? So these organisms in our gut, and how that affects my immune system, connecting all of these dots. Wow, just by what I was putting in on my plate was modifying my health outcome. There's a wonderful study done by a group at Mount Sinai where they took some patients, MS patients, and they found that when they consumed a diet rich in fiber and plant-based foods, that they changed the makeup of the organisms in their microbiome from favorable bugs to from unfavorable organisms to positive ones or favorable ones. And so the reason that's important is because these bacteria in our gut communicate with our immune system. So when you eat a diet rich in fiber, and then you now feed these good bugs, they become prominent in the microbiome, and then they in turn communicate positively with your immune system. So for those who don't really understand MS is an autoimmune disease that attacks the myelin, which is the fatty sheet that covers the brain and spinal cord. And so MS patients, an autoimmune disease is one where your immune system, which is supposed to protect you from foreign invaders, starts to attack you, right? So in MS, it's the myelin. In rheumatoid arthritis, it's the joint lining. So, you know, there are many different autoimmune diseases. So in this study, what we learned is that these little bacteria affect the immune system. So all of a sudden, this immune system is being triggered to do damage by these bacteria, the bad ones. But then when you consume a good diet, the bad ones go away and you have these good bacteria, and the good bacteria do not trigger the immune system to damage the myelin. I mean, that's pretty amazing stuff. And this is like recent science that we're learning. So when people say to me, well, that's crazy. How does your diet affect a disease that, you know, in your brain and spinal cord? There's the connection. You know, your food, you change the bugs in your gut, the bugs in your gut affect your immune system. Isn't that cool?
Yeah. No, it's pretty amazing stuff. I mean, you know, to understand, because I think everyone's kind of like, we work in silos when we approach our whole wellness. Like everything's a silo of this and this, and then
Yeah.
like food has kind of like, we've forgotten that it's meant to fuel every cell in our body, and
Yes.
it has an impact on everything we do. It's not just to feel full, it's to actually do
Exactly.
something.
I mean, so right. So all of a sudden, like eating for me became something so special. It wasn't just like eat so you have few, you know, so I can keep going and I won't be hungry. It was like, wow, you know, I'm sitting down, I'm having this beautiful plate in front of me, and I'm really grateful. Um, and there was like this sense of joy because it was not only delicious and satisfying me on that level, on a gustatory level, like I was enjoying the food. Because that's another thing people said to me, oh, you don't eat cheeseburgers, your life must be miserable. And so, no, it's not at all. I was miserable when I was eating those cheeseburgers because the way I felt after all of that. And, you know, the science behind why we consume the food that we do, and sugar, salt, and fat, and how that affects your brain, and all of that is, and food companies know this, and so they have us under their thumb and controlling us and making us sick. But
Yeah.
the difference, though, is maybe in the past we didn't know that we were being controlled. That's what this is all about. It's about getting the information out, educating the public, so that you can make decisions, well-informed decisions, right? So if you choose to still eat that cheeseburger, or still eat, that's on you. But the point is that we all have the power to do this, and we can. And I think, for me, again, not just living with a chronic disease, but as a physician, 30 plus years of practicing medicine, I've seen a lot of pain and suffering, that I know now is preventable. And it's not just the patient that suffers, it's the family that suffers, to see your loved one suffering. That's really hard stuff. I mean, I know I've seen, the ICU, the nursing homes where patients are, demented, wearing a diaper, and their family members just suffering, witnessing this, and the end is horrific and painful. No, we can reduce this pain and suffering on a grand scale. My hope for each and every one of us, Damien, is that on that last day on planet Earth, that we spend that day surrounded by family and friends, and we laugh, we dance, we eat a beautiful meal, we share our stories, and then we go to bed on that day at age 98, and you pass away peacefully, you know. Instead of what we typically see in our country, sadly, and again, it's not just our country, it's globally, that bookend of suffering at the end of life, where you're in an ICU, or you're in a nursing home, demented, confused, wearing a diaper, pressure ulcers. I know, I mean, as an infectious disease physician, these are the consults that I would be called to offer advice on. And those are difficult experiences and moments, and they're unforgettable, and they're embedded in my head after years of seeing that. And so that's another thing that fuels me, is wanting to prevent that from happening, so that, and when we optimize every aspect of our lifestyle, we also arrive at being our best self, and so that we can contribute on a global scale, and we can serve, and we can be best mothers, and best doctors, and best teachers, and best cousins and aunts, and just it makes a big difference on your quality of life, your level of joy, and your ability to really live. I mean, we have this one life, right? And we want to make it the best possible, and arrive at whatever our dreams are and our goals, whatever it is that you want to achieve. It's so much harder to do if you're struggling with a chronic disease, and it's about quality of life.
No, most definitely. No, fully on board. So you've shared a lot of kind of like wisdom there, like basically, I think key takeaways for me out of what you just said is you basically personally approach this like a journey, like you go off, and then it's like an adventure to discover new foods and reacquaint yourself with food, and then discover what works for you, like try all different things, and then really tune into your body and see how it's responding to the different things, because we're all biologically different, so different
Sure.
foods will have a different impact on us. And then so feel that all out and see it as an adventure, and then as a lifelong kind of like journey, keep on refining to come up with that ultimate kind of like the foods or the diet, whatever your works. You don't have to attach yourself to any particular paleo, keto, or any of these kind of things.
Um,
Find out what works for
Good
you,
for you.
and then
Yes.
understand that there is a whole range of wonderful foods out there, herbs and spices, which are
That's
waiting for
right.
you to discover them, and then start including them in the diet. And then how can that be boring? Because the cheeseburger is pretty boring compared to
Exactly.
all of that.
Exactly. And we're all global citizens, right? What may be of interest in one part of the world may be very different. Like the climate is different. We're growing different fruits and vegetables. It's very different. I'm Cuban, and so what I grew up with is very different than my husband, who's Italian. But within those cultures, everyone has plants, right? And so we pick and choose, and it's really interesting to try things that maybe you didn't grow up with or that you're not familiar with. Like broccoli rabe is something that is very prominent in the Italian cuisine. It's a green that my husband really enjoys. And I've never had it before until I met him. And so I prepare that for him, and similarly, it's so exciting to try different foods from different parts of the world. And you can experiment, but the bottom line is that you want to eat a diet that is primarily plant sourced. You want to eat a lot of foods that are rich in fiber and are rich in antioxidants and phytonutrients. That's the bottom line. And animals have no fiber, right? And we know the microbiome is a field that has really exploded, and we're understanding. I just shared that story with the MS patients and how it affects the immune system. But the microbiome plays a role in cholesterol. Microbiome plays a role in cancer. I mean, so it's really important for us to. And the bottom line is that a diet that is rich in fiber is one that fuels a healthy microbiome. So regarding animal sources in your diet, I don't particularly consume any, but if you were to consume some, again, what works for you is what is the best prescription. But you have to experiment. But keeping in mind that you want to eat a lot of plant-based foods, and you want to keep that plate colorful. In our, I don't know what it's like where you are, but in our part of the world, the animal is always the main part of the dish, right? So if you were to ask somebody, what did you have for dinner? They'll say, oh, I had chicken. No one talks about the side dishes, right? So it's really about the animal, and that's the way that I grew up, right? So what are you having? The chicken, the fish, the steak? It's really about making the side dish the main dish, right? So even if you're going to have that fish, that make sure that the sweet potatoes on your plate and the broccoli on your plate are a much larger portion, and reduce the animal source so that you're consuming primarily plant-based foods. Those are the foods that are healing. Those are the foods that are going to serve you best.
No, very true. So, well, let's start with a couple of quick questions. So, what is the message of hope you would like to give to others who may be out there at this particular point of time struggling with some form of chronic illness or disease?
I think that the primary advice I would offer is that don't give up. There's always hope. Today we're so fortunate that there's so much, you have access to so much information on the internet. I would definitely, if you're not familiar with this idea of lifestyle medicine, regardless of what your management plan is, and I'm not saying that you should give up on any pharmaceutical agents or any medical advice. That's important for you to have that. Whenever you receive any diagnosis, always seek a second or even a third opinion. You want to have different perspectives. But with that said, regardless of what your diagnosis is, cancer, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, whatever it is, optimizing every aspect of your lifestyle is only going to help that diagnosis. So, and sometimes it might even lead to your decreasing your dependence on pharmaceutical agents. Or sometimes it might lead to your being completely free of pharmaceutical agents, which is obviously the goal. Don't ever turn away from learning more about this approach that is what we call lifestyle medicine. Don't let anyone convince you that it's not important. It is. We have ample evidence. That's not my opinion. There's ample evidence in the literature that points to it. Find an expert in your part of the world that can support you, and watch for any fads or people trying to sell you a quick fix. That's not the answer. The answer is really paying attention to these 6 aspects of lifestyle. And, you know, when I talk about lifestyle in my book, I use a wheel to describe this. And I use that imagery because with 6 spokes. And the reason I use that imagery is because I'm trying to relay to the reader that um, each aspect of lifestyle is interdependent. And so you know, some people are really good at just their diet, or some people are really good at just exercise, and then they ignore other aspects. I had this one patient who was a triathlete, an extraordinary athlete, and, and he just had a really bad diet and came to me after having had a heart attack at age 42. And so, you know, the point is that when we optimize every aspect of lifestyle, we're going to have a really smooth ride. So think of that wheel. If you had a wonky spoke that wasn't aligned, you wouldn't have your forward movement wouldn't be very effective. So when you sleep effectively, you maintain your weight better. When you eat well, you're more likely to exercise. I mean, they're all interconnected, and so it's really important for us to almost on a daily basis go through that checklist. How am I eating? How am I sleeping? Did I introduce physical activity into my day today? And sort of check those off each and every day. And I think that if you do that, and again, it's not going to be an overnight fix. It's not it took me, when I tell my story and I say I went from that young woman with a cane to crossing the finish line at the marathon, that was 7 years later. You know, that did not happen overnight. And there were days where I had setbacks. And there were days where I started to question whether I had made the right decision. But I fought through that because I knew something was within me, that things were going to get better, but I just needed to be committed and continue. So I guess the bottom line is don't lose hope, get help, get support, find people who are also on the same journey to support you. I think that's another really wonderful thing. Social connections and support systems are great. One of the vehicles I used in practice was I would put together a group of patients that had a similar challenge, a group of diabetics, and not only, you know, we work together, but they also help each other and they create friendships. Just don't go about this alone. And there are people out there who are more than willing to support your path, and we can all do this.
Awesome. And what would you like to leave them with regard food as medicine, as a philosophy or a way to kind of like embrace how they approach nutrition and food?
I think with food, it's just about don't make it so complicated. Don't be so regimented. Don't if you make a mistake or you feel like you went off the track, that doesn't mean you can't get back on, and take it as a learning, as a moment where you've learned something, and then get back on. Keep the plate colorful and just be joyful.
Brilliant. And what would you say to people who perhaps haven't been making optimal choices and are not, they don't have any kind of like illness or disease at this particular point of time. They haven't been diagnosed, but what would you like to say to them about, you know, how they could embrace food as medicine or lifestyle, you know, what
Yeah.
would you like to say to these kind of like people? Because maybe they haven't heard the message yet, and then they need someone to kind of like give them a bit of a direction, like a reset. Which way should I go to not get
Yeah.
to where they're in the illness or disease kind of category?
Yeah, that's a hard one because we tend to make changes, particularly later in life when something's gone wrong. Just like everything in life, you know, we talk about. I was just talking to my daughter about being smart about investing your money and saving for that rainy day. Same thing here. At some point in life, you're not going to be 30 and everything feels great and looks good. At some point, you're going to the aging process will gets us all. And we all ultimately will develop a chronic illness if we don't act to prevent that. And so you have this generation, I think, has the wonderful ability, because they have the education and the awareness, whereas maybe we didn't in the past. We hadn't connected those two dots. And so we know better. There's a wonderful quote from Maya Angelou: do better when you know better, right? So we now know better, so it's time for us to do better. And it's all up to you. It's about, what choices you want to make today so that you live this glorious, joyful life, so that you reach your optimal potential. And in order for you to do that, you need to care for yourself and love yourself. And that means noting what you're putting into your mouth, how you're fueling those beautiful cells, assuring that you don't end up with Alzheimer's disease and all these other chronic illnesses that we regrettably, unfortunately, see too commonly. And I think the other misconception that my generation grew up with was that genes the genes essentially told our future, that we had no control. We know that's not true. So many of my patients will say, "Oh, Dr. Stancic, my father had diabetes and his father had diabetes. Of course I have diabetes. It's in the genes." Or my father had hypertension, his father, so of course I'm going to have hypertension. No, your father had hypertension and diabetes because you're all behaving the same way. You're all doing the same thing. So you can break that habit, and your son and his son will not have diabetes and hypertension, but it's up to you to break the chain. Right? So genes play a small role. Yes, genes play a role, but it's a tiny role. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Lifestyle is the most powerful predictor of our future. And that's information that maybe 20, 30 years ago was not commonplace. So don't blame it on your genes. It's all up to you. And that's exciting. Some people will say, "Oh, you're blaming." So now, you're blaming the patient for the disease. It's not about blaming. It's about empowering the patient, right? It's about saying to you, you can do this. Whereas before it was like, "Oh, I'm powerless. I have, I can't help. My genes are dictating everything that's happening to me." No, we can, and, regardless of all of that, things happen that we can't control, obviously. But my goodness, let's reduce our likelihood of developing these diseases and try to live a happy life. And as I said, nobody wants to receive that terrible diagnosis, and nobody wants to end their lives in a nursing home suffering. And believe me, as I said, I've witnessed that time and time again. So if we can, even if you speak to 100 people and one of them changes, that's wonderful. So all you can do is keep repeating the same message. Every time you do, somebody hears it.
Yep, no, very true. So what is the world you would like to see us all live in with regard wellness?
Well, I mean, I think for again, from my perspective, from as a physician, and so much of my work has been focused on changing what I believe is that root cause, the healthcare system, really changing how that's presented to the patient and to the community. And I think that if we did that, it would go a long way to changing social behaviors across the globe. Think about it. If you went to your doctor and it wasn't all about just, the prescription pad, imagine if you went to your doctor and it was this environment where it was evident that lifestyle was most important. Imagine if there was like a pharmacy, FARMacy, pharmacy, right, where those images were prominent. Imagine if your physician was extraordinarily healthy and talked about his or her lifestyle and how they practice. I used to ride my bike into my office. Be the example. Imagine if the staff imagine if there wasn't candy and donuts in the staff's room. Change the environment, be the example, and all of a sudden people will start to change. They start to see that it's not acceptable. when I was in medical school, and this is something I fought for 15 years. Eventually, I won, and we got it out. But there was a Burger King inside of the cafeteria at my medical school. A Burger King. We used to see this cafeteria would feed both the medical school and the hospital. And so at lunchtime, you would see white coats online getting the Burger King and patients from the diabetes and the heart clinic going to the Burger King. I mean, is that crazy? For years it was there. I can tell you how many letters I wrote, petitions I started. We held a protest in front of the hospital. Finally, in 2020, the CMO ended that relationship and it was removed, but it took a lot to convince them. That's equivalent to smoking in the hospital. You know, when I was in medical school, believe it or not, you could smoke in the hospital. But again, awareness, education, and we finally removed smoking from hospitals. But it wasn't until like 1995, believe it or not, that they did that. And there are still hospitals today that have fast food restaurants in their cafeteria. Tampa General Hospital in Florida has a McDonald's today in their lobby. And that's unacceptable. You know, when we know better, we must do better. And there's just no excuse for that behavior today, but it's still ongoing. And so again, it's about education and moving forward and hopefully getting folks. I think, you know, for example, if people demand that the change will happen. And that was the impetus behind making the film, because a documentary, you know, the hope of the documentarian is to reach its audience and urge the audience to act, to change. Like if individuals would say, you know, I want a doctor that knows about this. I demand a doctor that lives and practices in this fashion. If we demand it as consumers, they'll change. You know, if I lived in Tampa, I would go to the hospital and say, this is unacceptable. I don't want a hospital. I don't want this example. And, you know, Tampa General Hospital is affiliated with a medical school. So their medical students are witnessing this. And so if you're a medical student and you see your hospital with fast food, why would you think that's bad? Right?
Yeah, no,
I
definitely.
mean, it's equivalent to smoking in the hospital. When I tell my students that when I was a student, you could smoke in the hospital, they're like, no way, no way. Yeah. So, you know, we still have work to do, but things are moving in the right direction. I can tell you, 20 years ago, when I was talking about this, people would roll their eyes at medical school. You know, I've spoken at about, over the past several years, I've probably spoken at about 70 to 80 medical schools. And we've done screenings at many medical schools, and they've changed. I mean, there were schools that wouldn't even talk to me. Now they're asking me to screen the film, or can you please speak to our students? Can you help us understand what we need to do? So that's wonderful. And there are many experts from across the country that are serving to change curricula. In the film, we featured a medical school in Greenville, South Carolina, where they were one of the first medical schools in the country that implemented lifestyle medicine in their curricula. And I know that the work that Dr. Trilk is doing there, Jennifer Trilk, who's an extraordinary woman, her work, she's being asked to help schools across the world, really, across the globe. So, you know, change is coming, but until it's fully in place, we know enough today that we can get this message out to individuals today and allow them to begin their journey and their change.
Awesome. Last question. What does living your best life, or what I call a legend life, mean to you?
Wow, that's a really great question. I think for me right now, and I have to tell you, Damien, I'm largely retired now. Uh, and so for me, it's right now, my life is pretty simple, and it's about spending time with my family. Um, and that's really where my joy is. I have um, wonderful children and an extraordinary husband. So that's really, it's about spending time with those you love, and making and just planning adventures, you know, going out into the world, meeting people, seeing places that I haven't seen before, and just sharing joy. I think that's really my goal.
Brilliant. Well, Dr. Sancic, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation, certainly very inspiring and also hopefully empowering for people. I think we've conveyed the message that there's a lot of things within your power. You just have to make better choices, become informed and make those kind of like choices for yourself, and then embrace this lifestyle, living a wellness life, not just like silo in it. Like the focus of our talk is obviously food and nutrition, but basically embrace wellness as a whole holistic approach to life. It's important, and then don't necessarily get caught up in all the marketing hype, and just focus on learning what works for you and then making this part of your life. And then wherever you are in life, there is hope. You can certainly address wherever you are, and there's no negative kind of like you shouldn't really kind of like I think negativity kind of like perpetuates the problem, doesn't it? So
Absolutely.
if you can have a more positive outlook and then see there is lots of possibilities, you'll be able to address wherever you are. So I know you said you're kind of like retired, but I know you love sharing your mission and what you're doing out in the world. So how can people find out a little bit more about you and the work you do?
Yeah, so I have a website, drstancic.com, and also codebluedoc.com. Both of those websites will tell you a little bit more about if I'm doing any, local talks, or sometimes we travel across the planet looking for interested audiences. And then, sharing my book. What my book is entitled "What's Missing from Medicine." Obviously, what's missing from medicine. It's this idea of wellness and lifestyle, and that's really been my goal. I'm excited that, after COVID really sort of shut us down for a bit, so it's nice to get back on the road. I'm going to be going to a medical school in May and spending the day with them, and sharing the book. And we're going to hopefully do a screening of the film. So Code Blue um, is available on several platforms, including Amazon, Apple. If you go to the website, you can see where you can download the film or stream the film. And I hopefully people will see the film and share it with others. And the book, I'm really proud of the book. It's very simple language, and speaks to how we can optimize each aspect of each one of those spokes on that lifestyle medicine wheel.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Stanzik, one more time, thank you so much for taking part in the Food Healed Me series.
Thank you, Damien.